Hey, before we dive into this week's episode, if you've been enjoying the show, I'd love your support. Take just 10 seconds to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps others discover the wisdom and inspiration that I share on the Pivot to Balance podcast. Let's build a community of balance seekers together. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to share the love. Now let's dive into the episode. Hello and welcome to the Pivot to Balance podcast. I'm your host, AK, and I hope you're doing well. In a world that pulls us in a million different directions and with a billion distractions, finding balance can feel like an ambiguous quest. Join me on this podcast as I try to navigate life's twists and turns with mindfulness, purpose, and grace. In each episode, we will dive into topics like self-care, personal growth, mindset shifts by sharing practical insights, stories, and maybe even interviews. Get ready to pivot, to recalibrate, and find your balance. Follow the Pivot to Balance podcast, and I will see you on the other side. Welcome back to this week's episode. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about something that we don't often slow down enough to notice. And, it's about how our emotions that we suppress, they don't just disappear. They actually show up in our work. They show up in our relationships. It's in the way that we react to everyday stress. It's like if you don't have a good night's sleep and then you wake up and go to work early in the morning and you have like everybody coming and talking to you, it's just so irritating, right? And before you say, I don't suppress anything, I deal with all of my shit head on, think about these few things. Number one, have you ever been unreasonably irritated by something small? Like really small, and it just pissed you off? Have you ever found yourself shutting down tough conversations? Have you ever felt disconnected from something that you used to love? Or have you ever worked yourself to exhaustion and then wondered why you felt so empty afterward? That's not just stress, that's your emotional history playing out in real time. And if you think they don't impact your career, relationships, decision-making, I hate to break it to you, but they do. More than logic, more than strategy, more than willpower. So today, we are going there. We are breaking down how suppressed emotions shape the way we show up in work and life, and why this happens. Of course, I've done my research on it. Duh. And what you can do to start recognizing and releasing what's been weighing you down. These are just a few things that I have sort of noticed. I think about this a lot because I think about how I show up in every relationship in my life. Because the second we refuse to look inward, we start projecting outward. And here's the thing, you cannot hide from yourself. If something is unresolved, it will leak out in ways you don't even expect. For example, if you hesitate to take up space at work, maybe as a kid, you learned that being too much wasn't safe. If you overwork, chasing constant validation, maybe you were praised for achievement, not for who you were. If you avoid hard conversations and relationships, maybe growing up, conflict meant disconnection. We all have patterns, and most of them, they did not start when you turn 20. They didn't start when you turn 18. So a lot of the stress, a lot of how we react to the stress, to conflict or uncertainty today was wired in childhood. When we were kids, think about this, right? Like we had a clean slate when we were kids. We didn't really think too much about the society or nothing. Like all of these things were taught to us. We learned what was acceptable and what wasn't. So if expressing anger got you in trouble, you learned to push it down. If crying made people uncomfortable around you, you learned to numb it. If being too happy made others feel small, you learned to tone yourself down. And the brain, it's like it never forgets. It stores every single heightened emotional reaction as a shortcut. It's a shortcut. And now as adults, when we face similar emotions, our nervous systems pulls out the same playbook. Even if the circumstances have changed, even if it's not the same situation at all, if it sees even like a bit of resemblance, it's like this whole fight or flight mode. That's why some people struggle to set boundaries. Some people over-explain themselves, even when no one's asking. Some people avoid success because deep down they're scared of what comes with it. And before you think, no, that's just how I am, it's not. It's just how you've adapted to survive. Hey, if you listen to this podcast, I think you will also love my newsletter, Elevate Gazette. I talk a lot about elevating your professional and your personal lives. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter. Go to anushakhannan.com/email list, and I'm sure you will love it. Join everyone who is like-minded. And now let's get into the episode. And the reason that I think so much about this, even in terms, it's not just about me, right? It's about the people around me as well. Some of my closest friends and I always have conversations like this, and they're my close friend because we are able to have conversation like this, because it doesn't just show up in your personal life. It also shows up in your career, in like how you interact with people on a daily basis. I will tell you, for example, when I was a kid, I wouldn't like go out of my way to ask for extra sauce or extra ghee, which is like clarified butter. I wouldn't do that. I would ask someone to do it for me. And when I moved abroad, I noticed that pattern in me, and I pushed myself out of that comfort zone. I said, you're going to talk to at least one person extra today. I record podcasts. I do like video stuff. I go to so many networking events, but I've always not been this way. I used to be an introvert. That's the reason I love to think about things like this, because people, in terms of like workplace scenarios, right? People talk about workplace stress like it's just about deadlines and pressure. But most of the time, the real tension comes from unprocessed emotions. Think about this. If you avoid feedback, is it really because you don't need it, or because criticism used to feel like rejection? If you hate being micromanaged, is it about control or about feeling like you're not trusted? If you struggle with imposter syndrome, is it really because you're not capable, or because part of you still feels like that kid that was seeking approval? And in terms of leadership, especially if you want to be in leadership roles, this is amplified. A leader who struggles to delegate likely learned that their worth is in doing, not guiding. That's the one thing I've seen from a lot of different people in leadership roles is they're amazing at delegating. They love delegating. But they also say that they miss doing the job. I've seen a lot of people, say no to manager roles because they love doing the job than guiding people. But that clarity is very important, and a lot of people don't have that. Think about a boss who is overly critical. Maybe you're that boss. Maybe you or they were only shown tough love and think that's the only way people will grow. I've had teachers who have been highly critical. Such tough love, and that is not everybody's perception of life. A team member who never speaks up, maybe they learned young that it's safer to just stay invisible. I love watching people, especially like when I'm in team settings, because I love, because you never really know what emotion someone's suppressing, right? Someone's suppressing. And I love like noticing that, because you never know who needs to just like be noticed. And because work gives us such a rational way, quote unquote, rational way to channel emotions, we keep repeating these patterns without even realizing it. We say, I'm busy, but what we actually mean is I'm avoiding sitting with myself. And ignoring emotions, it doesn't erase them. It just changes the way they show up. You might overwork until burnout hits. You might struggle to connect with people you actually care about. You might wake up one day wondering why success feels empty. And if we don't break the cycle, you don't just pass it on to, your kids or other relationships, but you also do it at work. You pass it on to your teams, people that might actually be looking up to you. And the real cost of suppressing emotions is not just internal. It ripples into every little thing that we build. That's why I do this podcast, YouTube, and all of it, because I just want to build something, not for the sake of building it. I actually want to leave something behind that people can actually see. But the whole process of doing something, creating something, requires huge amount of self-awareness. And by no means am I saying that I'm like an expert at it. I only make this episode because I know half of the people that are listening to this are either working or you have a business or you're in school. And I think it's a very good, question to ask yourself. Like, do I know myself? Not the egoistic version, the actual version, something that you just have to sit with. And it's not easy. So what do we actually do about this? What can we do? Here are 4 ways to start recognizing and releasing what you've been carrying. Number 1, name what you avoid the most. The easiest way to find suppressed emotions is to look at what you resist. If you avoid feedback or conflict or deep rest, ask yourself why. Because your biggest triggers are also your biggest teachers. Number 2, notice your patterns in real time. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, defensive, or frustrated, just pause for a second instead of, reacting. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? And when was the first time I felt this way? Because you'll start seeing connections you never noticed before. Number 3, practice feeling emotions without judging them. Instead of trying to fix every uncomfortable feeling, just let yourself feel it. Because suppressed emotions only come back stronger. You feel like, okay, if I can avoid this today, I don't have to deal with this, and then I'll deal with it tomorrow. But tomorrow, it's going to be twofold. The sooner you sit with your feelings, the sooner they move through you. Number 4, the last one is reframe how you see emotional processing. People think emotional processing or processing emotion means breaking down, just sitting and crying. It doesn't have to be like that. It just means breaking free. Every unprocessed emotion is just waiting to be acknowledged. Think about this. If you go and stand in front of your boss's room or your parents' room and you're just like trying to have a conversation with them, they're like, not now, not now, not now, not now. Every single time you go and stand there, if they say that, you'd feel like, why aren't you acknowledging me? And then you'd get frustrated and then you would react even more, right? That's exactly what your unprocessed emotions are going to do for you. The moment you just let it in and the moment you acknowledge it, it starts losing its power over you. If you're listening to this episode, it's because you know that there's a lot of internal work that you have to do. And let me just say this. The work is never wasted. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just about work. This is about how we show up in everything. And when you start making space for the emotions you've ignored, something shifts internally or even externally. Like conversations will get easier, relationships will feel lighter, work stops being a coping mechanism, and you stop feeling like you're just going through the motions. This is the kind of work most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. But you're different, so you're going to lean in and you're going to build something real. You're going to lead differently. You're going to love differently. And most importantly, you're going to live differently. If this one hit home for you, let me know. Comment. If you're listening on Spotify, comment. I think you can comment on Spotify or DM me on Instagram. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah, go grab a cup of lemon water and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.